Hi, colleagues. By means of introduction, my name is Monde Soni. My role is that I'm the chairman of the Load Research Chapter, which is under SAIEE. Let me just open this up with a few points. We are all aware of the national lockdown that has been introduced by the president to try and curb the spread of the coronavirus in the country. So this has had certain implications in terms of the industrial load. So mainly the industrial production has dropped because most of our industries are not seen as essential services. So that is one thing that we know for a fact that has happened. And we've seen on the news that Coe has taken one of the units down for maintenance, which was thanks to the load that has dropped since the lockdown started. And also there is a headline from Fin24, which was published on the 31st of the last month, where it says that Eskom holds energy supply from wind producers as demand falls. So we can see that we have this situation where the demand seemingly is falling, and then there are certain implications, and that is what we need to discuss today and say, is there anything that we need to worry about, especially from the system operator's perspective? Now, there is a tweet that was posted by Eskom spokesperson on the 2nd, and this tweet was showing the load at the national level, at the system level, to show the load reduction that has been seen since the lockdown started. You can just follow Eskom Twitter page and you will find this curve there. Initially, the load was at 30 gigawatt, and then as the lockdown started, then the peak started dropping massively and very, very sharply each day. And eventually we have now a peak, the red curve, that red color, that is the actual load. So it's a residual load after all the generation has come through. And now it has dropped to about 23, 24, and they said that it dropped about 7,500 megawatt. So this is the situation currently that the system is experiencing, dropping from there down to here. And now a couple of things that we know for a fact that have happened is that the load that is non-domestic, which naturally has got a higher load factor, has been reduced, which is that non-domestic load, industrial, commercial, etc., that has been reduced, and that leaves the peaky load, which usually has quite a low load factor, and this is the domestic load, and most activities have moved to the domestic space. Now, the other thing that we know for sure is that the PV generation, which is made up of SSEGs and large scale and small scale, is still pumping into the system. Yes, we know that there is that headline that the wind, and I think this was referring to the wind energy, that it has been halted by Eskom. Now, with all of this said, with understanding the context that we are working in, now the points of discussion that I have taken, and obviously this comes from the social media space, so the discussion is really guided by the points that were submitted on the social media space. So there are a few points that have been extracted from the debate that is happening on social media, and I encourage everyone to go in there and see if there is anything else that you can take from there. Now, one question is, or one issue is the issue of cost of operating a system during this period. So this is during the lockdown. what are the cost implications of operating such a system? So there is the main focus here is the deemed energy cost. Firstly, there is a comment from the two colleagues here that I've quoted, where they wanted to know, from the coal perspective, what would be what we can call, even in that space, we can call it a deemed energy cost. I would like to open for any comments in terms of coal, and the question, maybe to expand the question, to elaborate on the question. The question was, as the load is being reduced, so obviously then the production from the coal-fired power stations will have to reduce. Now the question was, the contracts that generation has with the coal suppliers, are they supposed to pay the coal suppliers as though they were supplying coal that is being used, or do they pay as they use? And that is the main question. Any comments from anyone?
Monde, it's Jana
Yes.
speaking.
Hi, Jana.
Hi everyone, I'm Jana Breedt from Transmission Demand Planning. I look at the long-term demand planning within Eskom. My question is just, or my comment and then question is on the items that you mentioned that plays a role. One of my biggest concern is you mentioned that, okay, so we've got Kuberg out, we've got PV generation still pumping. So what you therefore saying is that the profiles is changing. So one major impact or major cause of the major demand decrease that we've seen is because of all the industrial and manufacturing sectors that went into care and maintenance mode. So some of our main revenue sources and our high energy intensive clients or customers has been put down to care and maintenance. So that is one of the main contributors to having that major decrease in our demand, as we can see. So my question then is, as part of the discussion, is we've got this energy cost, but my question is, how long will this decline stay in place? And I think that even brings a different complexity to the network operating, because should they all return at once, I mean, obviously there's a sudden ramp up of energy that we would still, that we would basically be being put back on the network. So my question is that considered? And then the time span, I just looked at the latest forecast, short-term forecast, which is similar to the one that you showed previously. And they actually show a return just past this month. So my question to them as well was, and I actually posted it to them, to say that, do they really expect, and maybe, I don't know if things are in America is maybe not totally under control yet. We sit with the base of uncertainty in South Africa is that we don't know if our lockdown is going to continue for longer than anticipated, and our severity of our cases seems very low. But we are, as forecasters, very weary of the actual figures that's out there. So we've got this pre-anticipation that it might exponentially increase within the next few days, and then it would have an impact on how long we will be in lockdown, and that will have an impact on how long the lowering of the demand will be, and therefore the cost on the coal and the residential, the renewables that we need to purchase. So it all has a rolling effect. But I think one major contributor, which you've missed out here maybe, is the fact that some of our key industrial industries has been put down to care and maintenance. And should they come back, it would be a sudden ramp up, or should they stay away longer, there would definitely be a longer lag in our demand.
Interesting. Yeah. Next, anyone? That's very interesting. Thanks, Jana.
So,
Any? Yeah. Go for it.
one difference, of course, is that we're coming out of our winter here. So right now is an extremely low load situation, and our solar peaks haven't really started to grow. But in May and June we get a lot of our solar, so that's when we may see a lot of our morning and evening ramps be problematic. But I'm suspecting. So you may be able to look at some of our load shapes for what you see in coming months for what we see now. But you may actually, I don't know. There's similar conversations I know going on in India right now, and I'm sure other countries. I'm just aware of that one where they may have more similar weather patterns that you have right now, as well as the industrial and residential shifts.
Yeah. Um, Jana, very, very interesting comments that you have put there. And I think when it comes to the situation that we are faced with now, you've rightfully pointed it out. We have the immediate impact that we are experiencing and we're going to experience right now. But after that, I think we need to be aware of that there will be a period where we sort of get out of this phase, but then what will be the lasting impacts that we are going to see now going to the future? And is there well, unfortunately, as I work for Eskom personally, so I wouldn't be able to comment on what coal contracts Eskom has with the suppliers. But I would say if we look at the question that was asked on this issue, I would say perhaps it is about time that certain contracts be reviewed, and we need to remember that there is a possibility of this scenario happening. Maybe we were never aware of it in the past, and now it has shown itself. It has shown that it can actually happen, and what is it that we can learn from it? I think that's the main thing. And Jana, you mentioned that when all this is over, if, for example, we say that the industries that have been shut down or put on maintenance, they all come back online. Are we ready for that eventuality? And would we be able to immediately supply the required megawatts that those industries will be looking for? I don't know. Any other comments? A comment in terms of that point there?
I just want to say something on the side with relating to the comment that we got from America. It's maybe not specifically related to this, but it just highlighted that I think we must be wary of benchmarking and to who we are benchmarking, because that is a very important point that I did not consider. If we consider looking at the effects that other countries has experienced, it's important that we look at similar weather patterns and economic patterns, because typically there would be a different kickback in going into a summer than going into a winter. So the usage curves would also look different. So that was a valid point brought in by one of our American colleagues. I just wanted to mention that on the side. Sorry, Lloyd, you can proceed.
Okay. Actually, Jana, the very last point that you just made, that was the point I was going to make, that from our side, we are actually going to enter winter period now. And we know we are actually struggling normally with the winter peak. But at the same time, I think when you listen on the news in terms of the lockdown, not only in South Africa, but globally, there's a serious problem about the economy taking a serious knock. So now when you balance the issue of that ramp up when all the companies and industry come back, I think we need to have something like a scenario-based forecasting, where you have a scenario where everything is okay with all the companies, they come back, what is the forecast there? And the second scenario that you can have is that your expectation is that you are going to have all the companies coming back. But unfortunately, because of the economy taking a knock, some of the mines are going to close their shafts. some of the even when you look at retail shops, already there are some these what we call malls that the owners are already complaining that some of the shops are actually considering, if they don't get any funding somewhere, they're actually going to close their shops. So when you look at all of that, the expectation is that there's going to be a ramp up, whereas it's going to be the other way around. There's not going to be enough customers that are going to be there, which are going to consume the electricity that they're going to put in place. The other thing in terms of the coal contracts, fortunately, I'm not working on that field, so I can comment on this. My thinking is that, remember, Eskom had a situation where we were having a lot of rainfalls recently. And Eskom had to ensure that even in power stations which were struggling with stockpiles of coal, they had to even use trucks to make sure that they have enough coal there. So they were actually Eskom was pushing, contracts for coal to ensure that there is enough stockpile of coal. Now all of a sudden, the electricity consumption has gone down, but the coal contracts are in place. So ordinarily, you have to honor that, whether you are using the coal or not. And in a way, that coal stockpile, for me, it's like storage of electricity. But now you keep on pumping coal, and you are not necessarily using all of that coal. But unfortunately, you have to honor those contracts. So my view is, maybe some of the short-term, the long-term contracts, there's nothing you can do with that because you are locked on those ones. But if there are those which are short-term contracts, which you can use them for emergency purposes, those are the ones that needs to be more flexible to allow times where we are currently. My last point, someone said, when you are in a war, you prepare for peace. When you are in a period of peace, you prepare for war. So where we are currently now, we need to prepare for a time where there's going to be a need of electricity. And this is the time for us to actually do so that we don't become reactive again, like we did before the lockdown period was actually called, because we became reactive instead of being proactive into this. Thank you, Mode.
Scott here again. I'm not a lawyer, but
Go for it.
I wonder if of all these contracts, they don't have force majeure clauses in them, and that maybe some of these contracts are able to be gotten out of. Just a side comment.
Yeah, in fact, I think Shandukani he mentioned that on LinkedIn that there has to be some form of insurances, some insurance clauses that are built in these contracts. But I guess, whatever the situation is, the person that will make use of this information will have heard what are the possibilities out there, and what is it that they can expect to find themselves in. And I just wanted to mention something: the coming back or the recovery after a situation like this. I think we have seen it with the recession period where we had a dip, and in our electricity consumption, it actually did not go back to where it was. All the forecasts that were put before that period, they were all overstated suddenly. So I think, and also other minor dips that we had after that, where we would expect. I think I quoted two in our previous discussion. I quoted the Marikana massacre that we had, that really impacted a lot on the mining industry, and which goes with the smelters and whatever is linked to that. And we thought that that would just be a dip for a temporal period, and it would naturally just come back immediately after that. But we waited for 2 years, 3 years, and it just didn't look like it was going to go back to where it was. So there is something about consumers of energy or users of energy that they tend to sort of climatize to the new environment, and they find new ways of working out of the event. And that means chances of you seeing exactly what you saw before the event become very slim. So I think whatever the monster will be after this that we have to deal with, it's just going to be different. Chances of going back to where we were are very, very slim. We might actually have this situation dragging for a very long time, even after the recovery in terms of just the health, the pandemic being over. But then to recover the economy and the consumption might really take too long. So with that said, there is another elephant here in the room, which is that the deemed energy cost in terms now of the renewable energy sources that we have. We have seen that that statement there, and it was all over, that now Eskom wants to curtail the wind generators, and that they cited, when I read the article from Fin24, they cited the reasons that our wind generators come on, they are at their maximum during the early mornings of the night, so that's when the load is at its lowest. Now, then the way to deal with that, the easy way to deal with that has been to curtail them. And now what I found there is that also, which kind of complicates things, is that according to the contracts, they still have to pay those generators, and I think they pay them as though they are generating. I don't know. I think there is like a unit that, like a fixed price, that if you curtail them, this is how much you have to pay. So that, because you are the one, or the system is the one that is not able to take the generation, so they have to pay the generator for, even if the generator is not generating. Yeah, is there any comments on that, especially from the American side? What's your experience on this?
So this is one of those cases again where it varies state by state, and we have a wide range of how distributed resources are compensated. So in some states you have a fixed rate. In other states you have net metering, so you don't actually, you just see the net of the generation and the load combined. So there's no easy answer to how you deal with that, and there's a lot of individual contracts, and especially the larger scale ones are going to have their own interconnection and feed-in rates. So again, it's hard to draw an easy parallel there.
Monde, I think we might get a different view of this if Clinton has some ideas stockpiled from recent national modeling with integrated electricity plan. I wonder if Clinton has some comment ready at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Clinton here. Yeah, I head the Energy Centre here at the Council for Scientific Industrial Research. I guess it's more similar for US colleagues to NREL in terms of the area that I lead, obviously much smaller than NREL. It really does talk to least cost economic dispatch. It would be sad to be curtailing zero cost fuel generation and still, paying for other forms of fuel at other stations that still run. And I mean, the switching down to one of the nuclear units is interesting. I think Eskom would probably need to do a least cost economic dispatch model to say, given ramp rate constraints and given min-gen constraints, those are probably the major drivers. And what the least cost in terms of what should be curtailed. Coal contracts, is it renewable energy contracts? Because I mean, Eskom is already taking a financial hit by turning off one of the Kuiberg units, which has probably got its lowest short-run marginal cost of the fossil fuel fleet. And what comes next in that order in terms of to do this, and especially if we're going to sit with this for a period of some time. that would be a suggestion in terms of having a look at that further.
One thing you could look at is the California market introduced a ramping product. I think it was about 2 years ago, because that region of the U.S. is seeing the highest level of solar penetration and resources cutting into potentially the base load on the shoulder parts of the curve. So they have a ramping product. So they're using least cost economics to dispatch, but they also have to have resources to provide this ramp for the morning and for the evening. So they have a new product there to cover those costs, which some of those resources, obviously the solar and the wind, aren't doing those services. So you can look to that market design. Granted, it's going to take you a while to implement that kind of a model, but there may be another way to think about your least cost optimization problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys. Any other comment? I thought I had someone coming through.
I think it's Clint again. Just commenting that we don't have a market in any sense. There's still a single buyer model in terms of a vertical integrated utility that's also acting as single buyer for a whole lot of renewable energy IPP off-takers. The system operator then needs to have some kind of transparent methodology, because it's dispatching. It's dispatching its own generators, and then decisions on curtailment of IPPs, whether they be thermal or renewable. So I think in the absence of a market, it's very important, and my suggestion to my Eskom colleagues that techno-economics be done, because when curtailment happens, and especially if it's going to be claimed potentially to be force majeure without compensation, that will trigger all sorts of questions around why aren't you turning off high-cost coal, and why are you curtailing this, and why are you curtailing that? Because somebody will be unhappy no matter what you do. If you start to anything. So something that's clear, transparent, that you can take out there, because normally a market would do that, and through balancing and the market would settle. But in the absence of a market, you'll need. My suggestion is, if that's not already part of the work plan, maybe have a look at it.
Yeah.
And of course,
okay.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Clint. So, colleagues, I think this comes down to the least cost economic dispatch here, and it's something that would probably be a public interest. I think, if the system operator would be able to perform that, and whatever decision that is taken, it's taken with, at least it's an optimal dispatch in terms of the economic cost, and I think we have talked about the issue of contracts, and it's probably common knowledge now that the PPAs that exist between that single buyer and the IPPs is such that if you can take, you still need to pay, and which perhaps is a problem. And now we are going to see that more now that we are faced with this situation. So if there is no additional comment on that, I just want to move over to
maybe Monday, one more, and apologies from my side for butting in. But I think this is a wonderful opportunity in that it's almost accelerating some of the future energy system issues, because we were only expecting to start to run into min-gen ramping curtailment issues in several years' time. But because the renewables are staying the same and the load is reducing, Some of the challenges that we were only expecting in 5 or 7 years' time are starting to hit now. So it's a great opportunity to be looking then at the system, the ramp issues, the min-gen issues, the flexibility of the coal, because fast forward 10, 15 years' time, you still have a problem in the system. And that coal's going, and even if the load is much higher, the much higher renewable energy forecast penetration levels, this whole flexibility dynamic, and the need for flexible demand response, flexible load research. We're actually entering a period now where the month ahead we're beginning a bit of a preview of our future. Let's keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Clinton. In terms of the possible solutions, now on top of the ones that have been, yeah, Lloyd.
Sorry to interrupt you there. Before you jump to the next section, just a question. I know when we started, you said these are informal discussions, and I'm also aware that these discussions are being recorded. Now, my question is there a platform somewhere, whether within Eskom or within the Department of Energy, where such discussions are actually taking place? Is there some sort of a war room? You know, these days in South Africa, we are talking of a war room when there's an urgent matter to be discussed. Is there some platform or a group of specialists somewhere discussing or having the same discussions that we are having now? And then the other question is, are you going to take these discussions forward to someone so that at least somebody somewhere on a very high level can be able to take these discussions forward? Because for me, these are important discussions that we are having currently. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, no, thanks for that feedback, Lloyd, to say these are important. So, unfortunately, I'll answer just from the side of the load research, the SAIEE Load Research Chapter. All that we are doing, we are just providing a platform for informed opinions and to inform whoever might need that information out there. So I remember post our discussion last week, I had a good discussion with one of the professors from one of the universities who had listened to the previous discussion, and there were some interesting points that he took out of that, and he can use those points for the for the academic research, be it a to add to some research questions that he's dealing with. But also, as we have this wide audience, from academic, from industry, etc. So this feeds now to their knowledge, and they can use this as their backdrop, to start thinking. So I can only hope that something like this will activate what you are saying there, Lloyd. It will activate those kind of discussions that can help the industry, and help different players in the industry to advance. If they supply like Eskom, then they probably can take the points that are being suggested here. Some of them, they can make use of them. That's the aim. So we can only just provide the platform, and then the next person can take that information, as long as they just say, based on this discussion, which is really opinion-based discussion, then they can say, based on this, then we have decided to study the following further, because these are the opinions that came through out of the discussion, and they don't represent anyone's position. I hope that answers you, Lloyd.
Monde and Lloyd, this is John from PLMA. On that point, I have a few contacts through my graduate program with wind developers that are experts on contracts here in the United States. Would it be beneficial at all to try to foster a conversation with them? They might be able to provide some more nuanced information.
I think that would have to happen between the custodians of those contracts on this side, but from the SAIE side, we don't, it's not our space. I just hope that there is someone here who can be able to follow on, to follow on what you are saying. There could be someone listening to this at a later stage, and they will know that this is what you mentioned, and they can easily follow up with your suggestion there, John. So I can say upfront yes, because as I'm saying, I'm not representing the utility. We're just providing the platform. So hopefully someone is listening, and then they can be in touch with you, and we'll be happy if something like that happens.
Understood.
Mondi?
Thank you.
Hi,
Mondi?
Mike. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we know there is an office for the, I forget the exact name, the RPP office. The Karen worked there, focusing on how contracts are put together for both solar and wind. And perhaps the next time we have one of these informal get-togethers, we need to invite the people from this particular office. They're typically lawyers, etc. Does anybody know the name? I'm trying to Google it as we speak.
Is it on the DOE? Is the IPP office?
Yeah, probably is.
Yeah, it's the RPP office. The head of technical there is well known to many of the Eskom people. He's ex-Eskom Pervin Governor. I'd suggest that Pervin be included.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So we can follow up on that, and we can create that link, so that the discussion can start to happen.
Yeah, just for all our colleagues, I'm just going to post this in the chat box, so that anybody wants to go overseas, our colleagues overseas want to go and have a look, they can dig into that. One of the big issues is curtailment. It seems it's not clear, and it seems to be a closely guarded secret, but there is a lot of discussion, and we know overseas that curtailment, economic curtailment, is commonplace. The NREL people have done a lot of work in this area. But here in South Africa, there seems to be absolutely no methods or curtailment agreements put into place at all. And every single watt of energy generated has to be absorbed and paid for by Eskom. And I think therein lies a growing problem, because what is very clear is when the country returns in a few weeks' time, I don't think the projected numbers used in the integrated planning will make any sense at all. I really do think we need to go back and revisit the IRP for a start. I don't know what the feeling is amongst the audience tonight. Over to you, Mondi.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Okay, so some very interesting points there. Now, I would like to just proceed to the next one. So again, taking a lead from the social media posts, there were a couple of solutions that were presented there. And the first one was on spot pricing. And okay, so and I think this was from yourself, Mike. Instead of having this one pricing that you have to use, but you said you propose something like spot pricing, which can actually also be used to control the load as well, because if the spot pricing is being followed, then it means at certain times of the day, then the customers can be channeled to use more, or to use less, based on the pricing signals. And I think also that is something that is very close to Lloyd. Lloyd, it's something that you are also very enthusiastic about.
Yeah, Mondi. Okay, so just quickly, I mean, we've got time of use, but time of use is a little limited. So the thinking is, on the days when the wind blows, on the days when the sun shines, and we have a lot of output out of the Karoo, out of the desert areas or from the coast with the onshore wind, it seems to me as if we will have spare energy, and I can't see why on those particular days special offers can't be made to our townships, to the people in Soweto, saying to them, guys, now's the day you should be running your washing machines and doing all these things that are energy intensive. And dynamic pricing has been discussed. We've heard of the transactive energy approach. Somewhere along the line, we've got to move in that direction.
No, it makes perfect sense to me, especially if you think about it in that manner, that in the situation that we have now is likely to remain for a time that we don't know for how long. So the sooner perhaps we start to look at our tariffs and the structures of our tariffs, perhaps the sooner the better, because something has to give. We cannot carry on as if we are still prior 2007. And Mike, that was linked to the next comment that was put by Naniki. Here, Naniki mentioned a couple of things. She said, yeah, Lloyd?
Monday, just a comment on that one.
Yes.
Without necessarily going into the details of the project that I'm currently managing,
Yeah.
I think Mike also refers to residential customers so that they can also benefit out of it, if I heard him correctly. The challenge we are currently facing with residential customers is that they do not have the right metering technology so that we can be able to implement some of these dynamic tariffs. So I'm aware that Eskom and some other municipalities are actually rigorously engaged into the project of implementing what they call smart prepayment metering systems, so that at least we can be able to implement some of these dynamic tariffs, where both the utility and the customer can be able to apply flexibility and also benefit. Because what you also want to see from these dynamic tariffs is that as the utility, you don't want to lose any revenue. So they need to be revenue neutral. So, and at the same time, as a customer, you also don't want to lose. You also want to actually strike a balance between when you are not using your electricity more, and also during those times where there is excess capacity of electricity, where now the utility can allow you as a user to now use more. So that type of a balance needs to be struck, but you can only implement that successfully when we have proper technology. So unfortunately, we don't have that type of technology to apply dynamic tariffs within the residential sector. Thank you, Manu.
Hey, Scott Coe here again. I was just going to add that I fully support that last statement, that you need an effective tariff and technology to really get that done right. But we've seen some pretty interesting examples of customers actually responding to requests from the utility, usually through the government, without any financial compensation. So I wouldn't necessarily throw away the idea of suggesting to people that you use your washing machine and dryers during certain times during this emergency. I suspect even if it's a small amount, you'll get some impacts there that may help out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Yes, Marcus?
Manu, what we've seen historically in South Africa is that talking on the domestic side, the poor customers have some flexibility on the price side. They are sensitive to price. But as we go up, and this is the wealthy customers, around 3,000 units in Sandton top area, Our experiments seem to say that they're not that sensitive to real time and other pricing. That it's just not of consequence. It could be that the multipliers for the peak periods weren't high enough, but certainly we found that the pricing contracts were more useful as for load shedding purposes, but don't expect the customers themselves to actually do anything to yield that load.
Yeah.
If we go to the industrial and commercial side, I can't comment about that, but what I can comment about on projects that Lloyd and myself worked on was that the customers there seemed to be capacity in the industrial and commercial side to do demand reduction and so on, but it's tricky. It seems to be about how they're approached and how they're engaged. So it's probably about how effectively how the contracts are structured and how the contracts are marketed that kind of affects the take-up of such products. Perhaps the guys from the States can comment on that.
Could it be that perhaps, Marcus, with the wealthier customers, they would like to have numbers before they can make a decision? For example, you need to convince them that for them to change their routine and not do things as they prefer, you need to show them hard numbers that if you follow this signal and you do things during these times you follow this pricing signal, this is how much you are likely to save in so many years, etc., etc. Because also I think even the saving itself, it might not be meaningful maybe to a certain LSM level. If you say you will save so many thousands in a year, they'll be like, hey, you know what, it's better for me to carry on the way I've been living and have my freedom and pay those few $1,000. I think
Monty said certainly awareness of the price can change the level of consumption by 5 to 10%, and I think there's evidence from the USA side on that. But the price elasticity that we're seeing in the South African context, it just wasn't enough to bother these customers into moving. So it's all about the ratios of the high demand cost versus the low demand cost. But let's get the comment from our friends across the sea.
Yeah, I echo that. There's a couple other things to think about. One is fatigue. So when we have demand response, and we're talking sort of about anti-demand response here, so it's a little bit different, but we often see with a heat wave when we're calling multiple events days at a time, that we start to see the customers stop responding as much over, starting around 3 or 4 days into the event. So if you're talking about having a problem here many days, you probably will start, you may get a good response up front and then lose some of it as you go on. So it may not be as effective in long periods of time. The other thing that I think is useful to think about in the US case is that many of our programs have shifted over time from what we call active demand response with active load shedding to standby response. So basically customers who are willing to curtail in emergencies or during reserve shortages. And if you can get those customers to sign up for those programs, potentially you can back off some of your reserve margins on your fossil plants and use them for other ramping and things like that. So you may think about non-active kind of demand side management too.
Thanks. Now, I see. I'm just looking at the time as well. So the next point here, I'm just going to skip and talk about the perspective of the network, because mostly what we've been talking about now is more of the load and generation perspective. But there was a very interesting comment that came through for Mission, and I don't think he is here. So where he was saying that it will be interesting to see how the transmission in the long transmission lines are going to behave now that suddenly, certain load or a big load has been reduced, and that interprets to Ferranti effect. And immediately in my mind, I don't know, Jana, you are still here? Yes, Jana is still here. So immediately in my mind, I thought of those load centers like the Platinum area, those huge mines in Stillport Valley, where we have load in excess of 1 gigawatt just in one area with a few MTSs, and now suddenly those lines will be very lightly loaded. So it's something. I don't know if there is any network planner here from transmission or any system ops
I can't see
planner.
that anyone of that specific area has joined. I think
Yeah,
it probably, yes, there's definitely, and that was my concern with us ramping up very quickly. So there would definitely be some additional strain, but although I do believe we're not going to ramp up that quickly as is expected, I think there's a ripple effect that we can anticipate a slower ramp up back to normality. I think the unfortunate situation with our entire situation is that, which we haven't, I don't think that we really mentioned it specifically, is the fact that we're in a unique situation that although we've got the entire COVID or Corona effect, we've got a double up in a downgrade on our financial and investment status. So together with the gloom of the COVID effect, we've got the reality of being downgraded to junk status as well. So that would have its own impact. So we almost have a double up impact on our economy, which has an impact on our industries. So the other thing is, which might from another perspective, which might counteract the lowering in the demand, is the flow through on some of these MTSs from the IPPs or the renewables that might now become even more in effect because there's very little local load. So it might kind of get onto the highway of the transmission network and be flown through. So we might see a greater reverse effect. That's just my guess. From on the networks, from on the specific MTSs, and if you specifically consider areas like Eastern Cape, where you've got quite strong renewable integration and a lot of high industrial industries in that area. So if you're looking at an area like that, that would typically be where you would see maybe a higher influx of the renewables and less demand need on the actual ground.
And and I think that will obviously spill over to the issues of voltage regulation that the system operator will have to deal with. And
For sure.
also, very interestingly, it would have been nice to have someone from that side, to get to understand, for example, currently, are we dealing with a high frequency problem? Because all the time we have always been dealing with the low frequency problem, which is why, demand response has to be activated. Load shedding has to be activated just to make sure that we have a frequency within the range and the system still remains intact. And now it looks like the expectation is that the problem now is flipped upside down, and we suddenly have almost too much generation. So the imbalance between demand and supply is there, but it's just now the other way around. It's upside down. It's no longer what we are used to. And I think that if nothing is done, obviously that will remain a problem going forward. I don't know, anyone, any comment on that network perspective there from any one of the planners?
I'll just say that I know, or I believe that Hydro-Quebec, which is in Canada, has some fairly long lines, and I think they experience, I don't know if it's regularly or at least just infrequently, this kind of activity. So that might be a place you can look to if you're worried about this phenomenon, about some of the protection schemes they have in place.
Yeah. Okay. Now, colleagues, I would like now to just open for any closing comments by all attendees. Any advice that we can offer to the system operator during this period, and just give talk as if the system operator is here and is listening, and hopefully anyone who needs this information will retrieve this recording and they will make use of it. So I usually just follow the names in alphabetical order, or as I see them on my screen. I see the first person on my screen is yourself, Mike Parker.
Yeah, thanks, Mondi. Just a quick observation. Our new Minister of Energy and Minerals did say the other day that he suggested that dynamic pricing would allow the different technologies to balance to a degree. So I'm wondering if he's ever going to take that any further. We need to try and dig out that quote. I'll look for it and post it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I think that becomes fair to all, both the users and also the operator of the system. Anrich, hi, Anrich Steyn. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Very interesting discussion from our side. The thing that I'm very interested in is the technical perspective of it, the Ferranti effect and all of that, and the associated reactive power management that now has to take place in the Northern Cape, with the interesting dynamics we're experiencing with the load now. However, I think there were concerns about overgeneration possibilities, but it's also important to keep in mind that we still have very low renewables penetration, in that less than 5% of our generation capacity is constituted by renewables. So I don't think the possibility is too high for severe overgeneration at the moment. But it will be interesting to see from a technical perspective how the network is being controlled during this time.
Okay. Thanks, Anrich. Clinton?
Just thanks, and really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you guys for organizing it, and for overseas colleagues, much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Clinton. Jana, one last comment from your side.
No, I think I've said enough. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me as well.
Okay, you're welcome. Let me see. I will give the colleagues at PLMA, I'll give them at the end. Lloyd?
From my side, just my closing remarks. Going back to your initial statement, Monde, about the implications of a lockdown. I think, coming to think about this, when I look at an area such as Beggarsford, which is in Limpopo, and the mining industry is actually growing there. Now recently, actually, we were also monitoring the transformers there. This is now on the distribution network side, where they were facing serious challenges about overloading on these transformers. So a few weeks ago, just before the lockdown, actually, what we noticed is that there was a serious reduction of the consumption on those transformers in terms of the customers or the load. So, and we had to do quickly an inquiry from our colleagues there who are looking after the network. And when they said, what they said to us was that they were actually tracing and going after the illegal connections. And these illegal connections actually were disconnected from the network. And that's why there was that reduction of consumption. And now my question is, when I link those interventions with the lockdown now, because my biggest worry is now, because many of Eskom employees are actually working from home except those who are actually doing operations where they need to run the system. Now, who is monitoring and who is policing the illegal and non-payment on the distribution side? And more so that now the customers are locked inside their houses. In other words, there's no one now who goes and look at these customers, whether they are paying or they are not paying, whether they are illegally connected or not. So unfortunately, I cannot go back to our database to actually check. And Tando also is operating from home, so cannot go back and check whether during this lockdown was there an increase in terms of the consumption of the transformers, or that remained the way it was after they have done their intervention. So this is something that is important for us to link it with your question. That during this lockdown, what does it mean, especially on the distribution side as well? So those are my closing remarks to say some of the things are actually happening and we might not be aware of them. And when now the lockdown is over, what's going to happen to those transformers? Are they just going to explode one by one, or are they going to at least there's going to be curtailment of the load also on that side? Thank you, Monde.
Okay,
and thanks for the
thanks,
comments
Lloyd.
from our colleagues that side. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. In terms of the question that you raised, I'm aware that some of our colleagues have been given that status of being essential service. So I hope that there is the work does carry on as normal in terms of checking those kind of things, those operational issues. But yeah, when it comes to illegal connections, it becomes a very complicated and theft becomes a very complicated subject. But thanks for that, Lloyd. Then the next one is yourself, Marcus.
Thanks, Mondi. We talked about economic dispatch earlier on, and just to point out that I think for some time economic dispatch in South Africa has not really been economic. It's been more to minimize losses than to optimize. It'd be very interesting to see what load growth scenarios we have for the post-COVID area for us to place bets now as to how the load will recover. I think we're also seeing that the load will not recover to the same level based on your information of the previous disturbances, Mondi. And I think when the load does recover, the nature of that load will be different. It won't be the same load that we're going to see. That's all from my side. Thanks.
Definitely. Thanks, Marcus. Lastly, it's yourself, Ncedo.
Nothing from my end today. Thanks.
We hope that we have added, or the discussion has added something to go back and think about and see if you can have discussion as well with the City of Cape Town colleagues there. Now, from PLMA, if I can just give one person to give us your closing comments.
Well, I've said a lot already today, so hopefully we haven't overextended our welcome. This has been very interesting, and hopefully we keep in contact.
Okay, no, thanks, Scott. Now, colleagues, I hope that I have given everyone who is on the chat, I've given everyone a chance to say something. Now, on my side, just to close, I'll say that, with on top of everything that has been mentioned here, which I think these are very practical ideas that can be used by different either distribution system operator or transmission. I think on top of that, what I just wanted to mention is that now we have a new scenario that in planning, in forecasting, we need to consider this scenario. We need to have something that we call either a COVID-19 scenario or a lockdown scenario. That has to be part of the possibilities that we need to look at. So that, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that, for example, we need to put infrastructure that will be strong enough, or we need to put strengthening projects that will be strong enough to supply a COVID-19 extreme scenario. But it just means that we are interrogating that scenario and putting it as a what if, and we know that, you know, if this was to happen, these are the impacts, and these are the mitigating measures that we can put in place. It doesn't have to be that we have to physically invest, but it's a scenario that I think from now on going forward, in both in forecasting and in planning, we need to have that. Then also, what I can add, again, taking nothing away from all the good ideas that have been submitted here, I would say that the system operator planning, which is the very short-term planning, they probably now have to study, and I hope that this has started happening. They need to study what is likely to happen in the next week, and to study this scenario and say, what is it if this remains for longer? And it was mentioned by many people here. What does this mean for the system? What are the mitigation measures that we can put in place, so that with the system as it is, but the load declining, we know exactly what is it that we are going to do, so that we don't start to make to take moves that will really hit the business even harder, and you find that everyone is losing in the process. Colleagues, that's it, I think, for today. Please look out for our announcements for our future events, and you feel free to post some of these topical issues on LinkedIn and tag myself, tag Marcus, tag Lloyd. Let us know of what is it that you feel that we need to talk about. We are doing this for the industry. We want to inform as much as possible. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Good night.